you explained here. So is there any timeline? Like once that's done, is there any timeline for maybe then opening up higher grades? And what would that be based on? Or is it like we see how it goes for 2 weeks or a month and then we'll, open some other grades? Or is there any like definitive timeline or decisions? Would that be based on? Because then, you're almost getting into May when you're almost at the end of the school year. So I just wanted to find out if there have, been any thought or plans beyond the pre-K and third grade.
Superintendent Jar, for the record, Assemblywoman Hardy, we don't have a set timeline at this time. Our goal is, as we have seen across the state, having our conversations internally and starting to work with our bargaining units to see how that happens. Ideally, if I give you a timeline now, we look and see a couple, 2-3 weeks. Don't hold me to it. See how that goes, keeping the mitigation strategies, keeping our kids and our staff safe, and then potentially maybe my thinking right now it's 4th and 5th, and then seeing what my other colleagues across the state are doing and across the country. As Superintendent McNeil mentioned, every Thursday I sit with the Council of Great City Schools, and I also sit on the National Superintendents Association Task Force on COVID-19.
Follow up, that's okay. Sure. Okay. I appreciate that. And I was encouraged by some of the other presenters and the way that they have been opening and handling their district. So I think that's encouraging information. Because, I can appreciate we all have our families, we have our situations, we want people to be safe. And, but we also want our kids to learn. We want for their mental, emotional health as well, and their academic success. So I hope that you will keep us updated as March 1st comes. And I believe I understand that some of this is a parent's choice. Like if a family doesn't feel comfortable sending them back, or they have the ability to have them at home. Is that correct?
Superintendent Jar, for the record, Assemblywoman Harding, yes, parents have a choice to keep their kids to distance education, and that's something that we're looking at for next year as well. Parents are going to want to have that opportunity, so we're strengthening our distance education program as well.
Okay, thank you, Superintendent. Next, we will go to Assemblywoman Tolles.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I echo the sentiments of others. Thank you for all the heavy lifting that you've been doing, and we do appreciate you. This committee in the 2019 session considered a bill on distance learning, and the discussion was around weather, snow days, other kinds of hazards, breakdowns of even equipment, HVAC units, and so forth that would lead to circumstances that wouldn't be healthy for students to operate in until they got fixed. At the time, we never predicted that there would be a pandemic, but it certainly begs the question. Hindsight being 2020, wish we could have gone further with that bill. But we're under the governor's executive orders right now in a declared emergency that's given you the flexibility you needed to be able to implement all this distance learning. I guess my question is there something that this body needs to consider in the long run for future, once we are no longer in a declared emergency, that would give you the statutory requirements that you need to be able to be flexible in addressing distance learning needs down the road?
And if I may go first, and I know my colleagues who are also, Superintendent Jar, for the record, I know my colleagues who are also here with us this afternoon. And I'm going to put a plug in for, I know what the state superintendent is working on with the Blue Ribbon Commission. I think one of the things that in expanding our competency base that we already have as a state, I know that she will be bringing, the department will be bringing in some of those recommendations that I would encourage this body to look at because I think the flexibility is going to be the key.
He needs flexibility. He needs flexibility.
Oh,
Go ahead, Superintendent.
no, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Tolles. And as you know,
Please identify yourself for the record.
Krista McNeil, Superintendent of Washoe County School District. So within Washoe, obviously, we've had just recently snow days. And, I know that we have worked very closely with the Nevada Department of Education because this is a huge concern. It would be very nice to be able to turn those days, instead of using our contingency days at the end of the year, to be able to have a full distance learning type model. And so I appreciate that question. And I think this is part of what the silver lining, if you will, as far as everything that we are learning in this global pandemic as we move forward with education and down this pathway. And competency-based education is going to be one of those areas. And being able to have a child complete a course at mastery level and then move into the next course. And so having that opportunity, that we don't have to use contingency days, that we can just kind of keep moving down this pathway, I think is, one of the areas that we need to be looking at. And I appreciate that the Blue Ribbon Committee, we have a representative on there as well too. So just the opportunity to look at education, not within seat time, and not in the structure, in the confines of 180 instructional days. What else can we be able to do as we get out of the pandemic?
Thank you, Superintendent. Did any other folks want to speak on that? I'm not seeing any hands going up. So I will move to my Vice Chair, Assemblywoman Miller.
Chair, are you asking me for a question from the previous presentation or this one?
Was that from the previous?
It was because you moved us to the next item. I honestly think all of the questions have really already been addressed. Although I suppose I could ask one just for a little more clarification. One of our colleagues just asked a question about the choices for the students and families to be able to make those choices. And again, I feel like not to, it's about CCSD, but because this is the district that is actually transitioning right now while the others already have, about giving the parents that are concerned choices on whether or not they want to physically send their students back to school or keep them at home and continue their education virtually. But how does that look when it comes to staffing? Because again, there's been discussion and communication about educators having the choice and who's able to. And so what will happen if there's a difference in between the number of students that want to return versus the number of teachers that are able to return physically?
Superintendent Jara, for the record, Assemblywoman Miller, great question. Something that early data that we have just received, looking at it now. And you're right, and more kids than teachers, right? And that's the conversation, and that's where we're looking at the partnership between our administrators and our teachers to look and see where we can make sure that we have enough adults. One of the things that we're going to continue, we have in our agreement, is that emergent issues come up, we have to then come to the table together and find a solution. So I don't have total numbers in totality right now across all schools. The principals that I've had conversations anecdotally, again, have been that we have seen that we have enough teachers for the pre-K3 right now. The challenge, and I'll just, one of the concerns that we have right now is that, especially for graduation requirement, is ACT. That is a graduation requirement. and there is somewhat some concern that we may not have enough proctors. So that's one of the things that we have to come to the table and have some conversations around, because it is a graduation requirement. We have to offer it. That's where we have to do what's best for the children. And that's what we will do.
Follow-up, Chair? Sure. Thank you. And Dr. Jara, again, as we've been speaking, even as you mentioned ACT testing, obviously these are extraordinary times. So extraordinary measures and exceptions and requests and, you know, whatever we can do to make sure that our students graduate. But I want to follow up on a question that was asked earlier as well, which was, what if, you know, when students do return physically and if there is another outbreak, and it didn't seem that there was a clear protocol yet on how it would be handled. What is the protocol if there is an outbreak? Especially, I think one of the things that's unique to CCSD, more so than any of our other districts, is that, and I don't want to say, because I know in the rules we have students that travel long distances to get to their schools, but in CCSD itself, especially if you're looking at the majority of the Valley, our students don't necessarily attend school, just their neighborhood kind of zone schools. We have students in magnets all over the district. We have students that go from Summerlin to Green Valley. They drive, you know, they bus all the way down to Rancho. There's choice, so they, you know, one household could have their 3 or 4 kids in, you know, schools all across the Valley, which again becomes a concern if there is an outbreak, because now it's not just trying to contain in our community. I have to consider that how many of my students actually are living 20 miles away, and then, you know, where a fan out of this one household could have one kid going to school in Green Valley area, another in the Summerlin area, another in, you know, West Las Vegas. So is there plans in place for those protocols, and what can parents expect and what can educators expect, and, you know, in terms of the notification and what the protocol will be, and will it be one classroom or the whole building? Do we have secure plans on that yet?
Superintendent Job, for the record, yes, we do have our plans on our protocols following our contact tracing, following the Southern Nevada Health District guidelines. We are, and this is part of where I really appreciate the governor's leadership and the state superintendent, where we're meeting. We met yesterday, we met Monday, we're meeting again tomorrow, to make sure that our plans, the good thing is that I know that Superintendent McNeil and my colleagues have been doing this, and this is where we're learning from them, because they have been doing the contact tracing and some of those measures that obviously a little bit unique for Clark, but they're the same thing. So what I would tell you is that the partnership, not only from the state's emergency team, but then also the Southern Nevada, and then lining up ours, is going to be able to address that. So we do have to get into, obviously, the conversation about, we're going to need more contact tracing than my colleague in the north, because we have a little bit more schools. And that goes back to what Assemblywoman Hardy mentioned. We have to learn and get better with the 232 elementary schools before we expand to some of our other schools. But those plans are in place. We're timing up. We got 23 days.
Thank you, Dr. Jara.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a few questions. I was going to look around and see if other folks had a question. It looks like I just got a message from Assemblywoman Hanson. Can you just raise hands if there's anybody else? And if not, then I'm going to go after Assemblywoman Hanson and ask my questions. Anybody else? All right, go for it.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate the second chance in the right segment. I was curious, and this is a question for the Charter School Authority. We heard from Superintendent Fecht with Pershing County that they had a drop, in enrollment because of the homeschooling choice of 5 to 7%. I'm curious if you've seen a drop or an increase in your enrollment in the charter schools.
Thank you for the question, Rebecca Fiden, for the record. It's honestly been varied from school to school. In some cases, we have seen, I think, 5 campuses we've noted that they are less than 80% of their projection for the year, whereas we have some schools that have been right on track with their projection or within range and slightly over. Some of it has to do with local circumstances. For example, some of our schools up in Washoe County, where elementary school has been largely in person this year, have smaller campuses, and we have had some guardrails in place that they have felt like they've had families saying, well, we want to go to the Washoe County School District because our kid can go every day. And so we've actually seen it go in both directions. And I think it's a reflection of the reality. I think that many of you have shared today that many of these decisions are personal for many people. And I think, I've said repeatedly to my board, like, I wish there was a good one single right answer. And unfortunately for every family, every person, many times these are just personal decisions. And we see that reflected in the data that we see where our schools are varied from campus to campus and county to county.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that answer, Rebecca.
I will actually keep you, Ms. Fiden. So I'll start my questions with you. Since your charter schools have such a diverse plans, I know some of them down south began the beginning of the year fully in person. From what I understand, maybe not even fully socially distancing, but just kind of, went full bore. Then we have others that have incrementally opened in some ways. Have you seen, has there been an issue with spikes in COVID, and what is your protocol when that does happen?
Thank you for the question, Rebecca Fiden again for the record. So the beginning of the year, we limited in-person enrollment to 25%, which was, for example, the state's directives have tended to be at 50% capacity of every space. So we actually had more significant limitations in place than the state directives at the beginning of the year, and continue to this day, with a couple of exemptions that have been granted beyond that in unique circumstances. To your question around protocols and spikes that we've seen, we have worked very closely with the Southern Nevada Health District as well as the Washoe County Health District. Both of them published school response guidance documents, and we were part of the development of those documents, as well as brought experts from their agencies to talk to our schools about those response plans. And so those go into very high levels of detail about, if there's a case, what is the protocol, how does the contact tracing work? And then we also ensure that schools report to us when there is a case at one of their campuses. And we keep track of those as well and ensure that they've contacted the health district. So we're really, that oversight piece, I think, on our end has been, we've made sure to keep very close communication with our schools to make sure we know what's going on. In terms of your question of spikes, we have not seen huge spikes in any campuses. And I will tell you, one of the things that gives me the most confidence is I think our schools have done a great job responding. For example, in November, at the end of November, even though we had just in early November when things were looking up, actually given some more flexibility and increased our limit from 25 to 40%, in late November, numbers started to increase. Schools were worried about Thanksgiving and community and family gatherings. And several of our schools actually pulled back right after Thanksgiving and returned to either lower in-person learning or full distance learning for a period of time to actually ensure that those types of incidents didn't happen. We saw schools that saw, they had been seeing one case every couple of weeks and all of a sudden saw 2 cases in the same week and said, we're not going to risk it. And so I think our schools have been really thoughtful and cautious in the ways that they've responded. And we appreciate, I can't say enough for the work of our health districts. We would be really, really in tough shape without all the support that they've provided us, and they've been available around the clock to help. Really, or issues come up.
Thank you for that. And just to follow up on that, how do you deal with teachers who might not feel comfortable going back to my colleague, Assemblywoman Miller brought up, I believe it was you, Assemblywoman Miller, or might have been Wynn, about not wanting to go into the classroom. Is that a decision that they are able to make themselves, or are you in that position?
Rebecca Fine for the record. Thank you again for the question. Ultimately, each of our schools' volunteer governing boards make the decision about the instructional model for their campus within our guardrails. And so many of those decisions are made locally. We've said really repeatedly from the beginning that schools should be doing this work of reopening in partnership with their teachers, their families, their school communities. And so really encourage that. I have gotten a couple of phone calls, and we've been made aware of a couple of situations where there have been some concerns by a teacher, and by and large, I don't think there are any outstanding. At this point, we've been able to work through all of those, and I do think our schools have been very responsive to their families and their teachers. They all offer families, even if they're doing some hybrid learning, the option to be fully virtual, and have certainly worked with their teachers to make sure that teachers feel safe. I can certainly identify a couple of schools that the driving force behind them staying so limited in person or staying virtual is they have a lot of teachers who aren't comfortable, and they have decided that they really want to make sure that teachers are part of that decision point. And so, that's one of the challenges that our schools have had to face when they've thought about increasing in-person instruction is, do we have enough staff that feel like they want to come back at this point?
Appreciate that. My last question is, I think we've sort of talked about how students have moved on. Sometimes we see them going to private schools that are meeting every day. But as the virtual learning starts to go away and we start to see more in person, are we anticipating that we're going to then have a matriculation back into public schools? Are we capturing those folks? Are we able to know? And I believe that it's, from what you said, it's voluntary, right? So some people, if families want to have virtual or hybrid, are we including those folks who, like I said, might have gone away from their traditional public school because of, for whatever reason, that that they want their kids, or they have to have their kids in person? And whoever can take this.
Dr. Jar, I don't know if you want to speak to what you've seen in Clark County, but certainly I think it's quite possible we'll see some changes. And I know some of our schools have expressed concern about, well, this school down the street is going to go hybrid, and we're worried they're going to draw our kids away. And we haven't actually seen that play out necessarily. I think a lot of our families are confident with the community and the school community they're part of. But I think, certainly it's something that we're all worried about. And Dr. Jar and I have done our best to stay in close communication to help to avoid any issues between our schools.
Madam Chair, Superintendent Jar, for the record, as Ms. Biden mentioned, the constant communication is critical. One of the things that we're having conversations around is the potential of an increase with our current student population. Actually, and learning from my colleagues, is that parents may decide, well, is it safe yet with distance ed? And as they start seeing that it is safe, we're going to potentially see an increase of our current students. So we're taking all of that into account now, and have to be, I said it from day one, flexibility, patience, and grace are going to be critical as we close out the year and get ready to open up in August. But we are paying attention and making sure that we stay flexible for those issues that you're addressing.
I apologize. I'm going to ask one more question, and then that's it. You had, in the very beginning of your presentation, the issue of busing came up, and how I think it went from 76 to 28. There shouldn't be a lack of buses, correct? Because we have buses that aren't active for junior highs and high schools, the like. Where's the disconnect? Is it money because we have to have more? I'm not seeing the correlation on where the challenge is. If you can help me.
No, Madam Chair, Superintendent Jar, for the record, I'm seeing as we grow to a full, when we get to a K-12 eventually, because we do have a shortage of bus drivers. So right now with pre-K3, we may not.
Okay. Okay. That was my confusion. All right. Okay. Thank you. All right. We are at 3:47. I know most of us have 4 o'clock committee meetings. So I'm just going to do a real quick check to see if anybody else has a question that they're just burning, and I don't see any hands. So I think I'm going to thank you all for your presentations. Very informative. I know almost everyone has thanked you for your hard work, but believe that we all realize that this is an unprecedented time for all of us, and we appreciate your hard work and flexibility and being nimble. And so thank you for your presentations today, and thank you for getting the information that my committee members have asked for, and we look forward to working together this legislative session. Okay. All right. And with that, we are going to move on to public comments. Please remember to clearly state and spell your name and limit your comments to 2 minutes. Staff will be timing each speaker during public comment to make sure everyone is given a fair opportunity to speak. Staff in our broadcast and production services, please add the first caller with public comments to the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. We have one caller and they are unmuting now. Caller with the last 3 digits of 577. Slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chris Daly, CHRIS-DALY, Nevada State Education Association. NFCA represents a majority of educators across the state, with members in every Nevada school district, including teachers, other licensed education professionals, and education support professionals who provide vital services to students in Nevada's public education system. In NFCA's 120-year history, there have been few more challenging times than the one we find ourselves in right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. We appreciate the work of this committee and the legislature during this time of crisis. After school buildings were ordered closed last spring, NFCA members quickly responded, with classroom teachers engaging their students in distance learning and food service workers on the front lines, providing meals to families in our districts. This semester, our members are responding in a diversity in their district and the status of the COVID-19 crisis in their community. Some educators are back at their school building offering in-person instruction. Others are working in hybrid models, juggling in-person learning with distance learning opportunities. Many others, including, as you heard, in Clark County, are working to create meaningful education experiences through full-time distance learning. Last summer, NFCA supported the work of the Department of Education to develop Nevada's path forward, a framework for safe, efficient, and equitable return to school buildings. We felt this was the proper framework, along with consultation with local health districts, to safely reopen and operate school buildings this school year. Educators, as much as anyone else, appreciate the importance of returning to school for in-person learning. Distance education is not an ideal replacement for most classroom learning for most educators and students. And educators are concerned about the impacts of COVID-19 crisis is having on education equity. Top concerns with full distance learning include providing the same level of education for all students, the complexity of teaching students with disabilities and absenteeism. Also, most educators find distance learning and especially hybrid models more difficult, with more time required to teach the same lessons. However, educators have also been very concerned about their health and the health and well-being of their students. NFCA has consistently raised concerns that districts lack the resources needed to follow the recommendations to safely open and operate school buildings during this pandemic, and we continue to advocate for the additional resources. Yes?
Okay, if you could just start to wrap it up. We are at 2 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. I submitted my comments in writing. We look forward to working with the committee on all of the challenges ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Appreciate it. Okay, and with that, I am going to give a shout out to our counselors once again. I know we did on Tuesday, but this is Counselor Week, and Assemblywoman Torres has pointed out that Leanne Mangai is Nevada Counselor of the Year, so want to give her a shout out and congratulations for all you do. So thank you everyone for this meeting, and we'll see you next on Tuesday. Thank you very much, everyone.
Oh,